Looking back at my own trajectory through trans studies from the 90s to now with the benefit of hindsight, I see some things. I see first that it is important to historicize the point of emergence of something that called itself transgender studies. It's important to pay attention to how the term transgender, in particular sociocultural and linguistic contexts, articulated a break with the psychopathologizing category of transsexual and became an expansive identity category that some people embraced as descriptive of their lives. It opened possibilities for engaging differently with feminisms, gay, lesbian communities, and the psychomedical establishment before morphing into something else. It's equally important to ask why studies became a thing. The Academy is part of state and capital. Its pedagogical practices and production of expert knowledges are part of the reproductive process for those forms of power. The Academy is also a place of critical inquiry and hence a site of socio-political, economic, and ideological struggle. What in the world has made transgender a target and a territory for the production of necessary new knowledge? I also see how transgender studies was always fitfully lurching and stumbling towards what gets called intersectionality these days. So much of the initial conversation and so many of the earliest conversants in something that self-identified as transgender studies were unmarked as white, while at the same time being informed by and in dialogue with feminisms of color and critical race theory. The field could reproduce able-bodied norms, while at the same time recognizing that gender nonconformity itself could limit access and mobility in ways experienced as socially disabling. It could struggle to balance the robustness of a new model for understanding gender variance generally with the imperative not to impose a Euro-American and Anglophone frame of reference globally. States of affairs do not inevitably progress towards a better state of affairs, but I do think that trans studies has gotten better overall in holding itself accountable to the many forms of embodied difference transected by transgender. I think it's become clearer how some formulations of gender transness are predicated on concepts of transformability and plasticity rooted in whiteness, as well as how practices of survival and freedom emanating from racial minority experience involve a transing of bio-essentialized categories of personhood that can't be comprehended through gender alone. I think the field's conversation has gotten deeper and broader and drawn in a wider range of speakers who are making the space their own and changing the conversation in the process. That's a very good thing. I increasingly understand transing as an exploratory and experimental practice for surviving within and pointing beyond the biocentric world order constructed in the wake of European colonialization and racial chattel slavery. Transing demonstrates the lie inherent in that world order's deeply naturalized ideologies, its self-serving beliefs for binding people to unjustly hierarchized categories of unevenly distributed life chances by attributing certain meanings to their flesh. Transing manifests and enacts the material truth of a potential for worlding otherwise. It shows not only that another world is possible, but that another world is actual and exists now. We can change what our bodies mean and what ourselves become when we lovingly recognize one another in community across difference, when we work collectively to change social structures, practices of governance, and cultural imaginaries, we thereby produce new social realities. Transness is a practice of worming one's way through the belly of the beast. It draws strength from acknowledging a commonality with non-human material existence, the different onto-epistemologies of the pre-modern past, the reality of indigenous cosmologies, the survival of cultural forms that become sites of anti-colonial struggle, and the necessity of speculative visions of livable futures in which bodies and difference function within new economies of meaning. To manifest one's transness is to become semiotically unsettled within the racializing biopolitical assemblages of heteropatriarchal integrated world capitalism in anticipation of whatever else shall come. Whatever else shall come does not seem, from my perspective today, to be that hopeful for us Homo sapiens, at least over the next few decades. You can't breathe the air or drink the water as forests burn and oceans rise, pathogens circulate, social pathologies intensify, contradictions deepen. We are amidst a profound transition in human affairs. If something called transgender studies is to have any real relevance or utility in the present, it needs to stay within this trouble, address these conditions in the late Anthropocene. It needs to be a resource for transforming Anthropos itself, the figure of man that orchestrates our era, in whose name and for whose needs we now destroy the planet. Here's to the prospect of becoming something better than that. Let's live for that future, or die in pursuit of it.